LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome again to the June 19th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me again. For those of you who joined when I started earlier and had stream errors and the recorded show got messed up, and now I'm trying to start again. But I will again be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what I'm hoping will be a successful political commentary and media criticism fair use program for you all today. You can see from the title of my video here that the main topic I'm covering is enough Republicans realize Trump is likely a criminal. This is kind of a follow-up on the indictment that I analyzed last week, last Monday, which was the day before Trump was actually arraigned in federal court in Miami. And it's kind of a follow-up to a video I did a couple weeks ago about toxic Trump, like Trump being toxic for the Republican Party. He's kind of destroying the Republican Party, and to the extent he is successful, the Republican Party in the long term will not be successful. And I'll talk about that more when I get to some of the critical clips of Republicans finally attacking him. I'm going to show Bill Barr attacking him. But by the way, down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all of the clips I'm using, 1 through 11. And you can see clip 7 is Bill Barr going way beyond what he said on Fox News last week and like really getting personal and going after Trump's personality. Chris Christie also calling Trump a petulant child at one point. Asa Hutchinson also talking about the seriousness of the charges against him. Mike Pence, like not really saying much of anything, trying to take the middle ground. And then Senator Tim Scott not even really called or asked to say much about Trump because, of course, he's on Fox News Sunday, which isn't really a news outlet. And so stay tuned for those newsmaker clips, and I'll show those after the 5 news summaries. But first, I have a little bit of political comedy. The political comedy I want to show you is the Fox News bias I saw and the bad legal analysis I saw on Fox News last Tuesday when Trump was being charged. First, right before Trump gave his speech in Bedminster, New Jersey, Fox News inexplicably put up this Chyron. I guess Biden was giving a speech at the White House at the same time, and so they created this split screen here. Wannabe dictator speaks at the White House after having his political rival arrested. And so, like the wannabe dictator in this picture, if I'm supposed to choose which of these two guys is a wannabe dictator, and it's Joe Biden is the wannabe dictator, that is, I mean, talk about political comedy. And from what I understand from news reports, the producer who put that Chyron, that title, that lower third title up, has been fired, but I'm not sure why, because it's not all that out of the realm of the other stuff they do on Fox. And then for like really bad legal analysis, I wanted to show you this former Bush speechwriter, Marc Thiessen, who's always on Fox News, like giving ridiculous spin with these like half-truth factoids, and here he like doesn't really seem to understand the jury trial system, criminal jury trials, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch his really bad legal analysis last Tuesday on Fox News together over here.
There's an interesting point also that we need to consider as this plays out politically, which is, and Andy McCarthy, my friend, has laid out very clearly why this is a very, very damning indictment. Jonathan Turley said, he's got to run the table and beat all 37 counts, or he's going to have a terminal sentence and end his life in jail. He also only has to convince one juror that he's not guilty, and he's acquitted. Imagine what would happen if Donald Trump was acquitted of this, especially the trial probably happens right before the conventions. If you look back at how his poll numbers went up with the American people after the Mueller probe, when Mueller came out and basically cleared him of Russia collusion, then they had the first impeachment, and before COVID, everybody thought he was a shoo-in for re-election. Can you imagine the bump that he would get, not just with Republicans, but with the public in general, if he were acquitted of these charges, if he were found not guilty? It would mean that the Biden Justice Department probably elected Donald Trump to his second term as president.
Yeah, and then, you have the Durham report.
And all Martha McCallum says is yeah, and then starts talking about the Durham report. That is kind of ridiculous. Does Martha McCallum also not know how criminal jury trials work? Because one holdout juror cannot get you an acquittal, does not get you a not guilty verdict. Not guilty verdicts, just like guilty verdicts, have to be unanimous. There it used to be like in Louisiana you could get like 10 of 12 or something, but that was like overruled by the Supreme Court. So like, and especially in federal jury trials, you need a unanimous jury to convict or to acquit. One holdout juror, that's just like a mistrial, which in most cases means that the prosecution can retry the case if they want. That would be a delay that would help Trump, I suppose, and take it beyond the election, where he might become president and try to self-pardon or stop the prosecution as the head of the executive branch. But it wouldn't be an acquittal with one holdout juror, as Marc Thiessen claims. So that's the point I wanted to make there. Oh, and what was the other thing I said when I did this first live stream? Oh, that there was this old saying we had when I was a public defender, a criminal defense attorney many years ago, that especially if your client is not in custody, a continuance is as good as an acquittal. It just doesn't last as long. So to that extent, the one holdout juror getting a mistrial and continuing the case for another year or whatever, that is almost as good as an acquittal. It just doesn't last as long, but it's not an acquittal. Anyway, I'm going to move on to the news summaries here. This is where everything went bad when I did the live stream before. Hopefully it doesn't have anything to do with the CBS News Face of the Nation news summary, the longest one, where they decided to concentrate on what might have been the biggest story, Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to China to try to repair the relationship, the downward spiral in U.S.-Chinese relations, and that's a really important foreign policy story. Maybe it's more important than all of this Trump indictment and its effect on the Republican presidential candidate field that you'll see in the other news summaries, but I'll let you tell me what you think in the comment section as we watch the CBS News Face of the Nation news summary. Robert Costa is in replacing Margaret Brennan because Margaret Brennan is actually in Beijing, which I think is why, I don't know, is that why they prioritized the story, or did they send Margaret Brennan to Beijing because they prioritized the story? I don't know. We can talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We've got a lot to get to, but we want to begin with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to China, the first U.S. diplomatic mission there in 5 years. Margaret is in Beijing. Margaret, it looks like good evening to you.
It is, Bob, and good morning to you. Here in Beijing, more than 5.5 hours worth of talks between Secretary Blinken and his Chinese counterpart concluded. They were very direct, they were very candid, but frankly, it's good that they were talking at all. Bob, one of the U.S. officials in the room told me there was at least one point of agreement, and that was to stop the downward spiral in this relationship. But it is clear they still have profound differences.
Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Qin Gang, a close ally of President Xi Jinping, tackled a long list of grievances. The U.S. goal? Open communication channels to avoid a military clash. Tension spiked last summer when then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. And again in February after the spy balloon shoot-down. Now President Biden wants to move on.
But I don't think the leadership knew where it was, knew when it knew it. I think it was more embarrassing.
Beijing objects to the U.S. military presence in the Pacific. China's defense chief refuses to speak with U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a time when Beijing is massively expanding its nuclear arsenal.
The door is open. My phone line is open.
Miscommunication risks a clash. Last month, a Chinese warship came within 150 feet of slamming into an American ship transiting the Taiwan Strait. And in the South China Sea, a Chinese fighter jet buzzed the U.S. Air Force. The divide runs deeper than a failure to communicate. Blinken also pressed authorities to crack down on the flow of fentanyl. That drug is now the #1 killer of Americans under the age of 50. Beijing has its own motivations to meet. It wants investments to continue to flow as its economy is slowing. The recent Biden administration decision to cut off the sale of some advanced technology and high-end computer chips is causing concern.
Secretary Blinken will have a working dinner with his Chinese counterpart tonight, and tomorrow he plans to meet with a top party official who oversees foreign policy. All of these meetings really an intense push to try to hit restart on this relationship. Bob?
Margaret, speaking of a restart, what do both sides hope to achieve from these meetings, and will there be deliverables?
Expectations have been set very low for actual achievements in terms of deliverables, as they call them in Washington. But we know that here in Beijing, the ultimate hope may be for a face-to-face meeting between President Xi and President Biden this fall, perhaps as soon as September, or at a key conference in California this coming November. So all of this may be building up to that meeting between the two leaders of the world's most powerful economies. In the meantime, it is that economic interest that is also of chief concern here. The U.S. and Chinese economies are so intertwined. There's interest in lowering tension to alleviate some of that nervousness in the business community. And we also know that when it comes to concern about technology and investment, the U.S. wants to continue that flow between both countries and wants to tamp down some of the concern going into this next year. But fundamentally here, President Biden believes that this country of China is the only one in the world that has both the power and the intent to change the global order. This is about competition.
Margaret, will Secretary Blinken meet with Xi Jinping?
Bob, that meeting may depend on these next 24 hours and how they go. But arrangements are being made for President Xi to meet with Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State who has been a key aide to President Biden over his many years in the Senate and in the White House. So this is an important face-to-face to lay the groundwork for that possible presidential summit.
Margaret, thank you. Margaret, we'll be back later in the broadcast. We're joined now by William Barr.
And as I said earlier, I will have a clip of William Barr being really negative personally, like personal attacks on Trump after Trump personally attacked him. That's a clip worth waiting for. That's down in the video description. I have summaries of all of my clips, and that will be clip 7. Clip 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are all different Republicans in various ways reacting to the Trump indictment. I don't know if that news is more important than what you saw in China. I mean, that was a good analysis of the downward spiral in U.S.-Chinese relations. As to where that's going to go, I couldn't possibly predict, but it is an important story, and I leave it up to you to let me know in the comment section if you think that coverage from CBS News Face the Nation was better or more newsworthy than the next 4 you're going to see, which are all basically on the Trump indictment and its effect, especially on the Republican presidential candidates. I think in the next 2, you both see the same, like, slight nuance shift by Nikki Haley, and they'll talk about Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie, and anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary together on basically my main topic over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. This weekend, President Biden held his very first campaign event since announcing he is running for re-election. A campaign where he may very well end up running against a man indicted, prosecuted by his own Justice Department. The political world is only beginning to come to terms with what such a campaign will look like and what it all means for American democracy and the rule of law. Donald Trump has said that he will continue to run even if he is convicted of multiple felonies. a real possibility. It's also possible he may win the Republican nomination where, despite it all, he remains the clear frontrunner and maybe even the presidency again. We will talk about what that all means for Democrats shortly with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. We'll also talk to Asa Hutchinson, one of the few Republican presidential candidates who has said that Donald Trump is unfit for office. We begin with the turmoil in the Republican Party, where there is little evidence that Trump's support among party leaders or party voters is significantly eroding. It was almost exactly 8 years ago that Donald Trump came down that escalator and launched what was widely considered a long shot, even no shot bid for the presidency. He had no prominent endorsements and so little support among voters that he hired actors to cheer him on in the lobby of Trump Tower. Back then, Republican leaders largely ignored him, figuring he'd fade away. Instead, Trump upended the party and American politics, vanquishing or co-opting most of his critics within the Republican Party. Today, most of his opponents for the party's presidential nomination are, even now, reluctant to directly take him on. Ron DeSantis, as of this moment anyway, is the leading rival to Trump. He has said virtually nothing about Trump's alleged obstruction of justice or his mishandling of America's most sensitive national security secrets, beyond leaving open the possibility that if elected president, he may pardon Trump.
There's been talk about if for some reason he was convicted, a potential pardon. Would a President DeSantis potentially?
So I said before that even happened that we have an uneven justice system. We've seen it weaponized. I'm going to end the weaponization. We said this was even before this happened with Trump. We'll have people who've been wronged before we come into office apply. We're going to look. If there was a different standard, we're going to be very inclined to grant clemency in those situations.
Another contender, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, seemed to condemn Trump's alleged actions.
If this indictment is true, if what it says is actually the case, President Trump was incredibly reckless with our national security.
But the very next day, she too was raising the possibility of a Trump pardon.
What's happening is unfortunate. I think the Justice Department has handled this whole thing terribly. When you look at a pardon, the issue is less about guilt and more about what's good for the country. And I think it would be terrible for the country to have a former president in prison for years because of a documents case. So I would be inclined in favor of a pardon.
The most forceful Republican condemnations of Trump's alleged actions come from two contenders who are now considered long shots for the nomination, but both are former prosecutors.
This is of such national interest that you can't tiptoe. You have to be clear. These are serious charges, and we don't need a commander-in-chief that disregards our secrets.
It's reckless, it's harmful to American national security, and it doesn't show the kind of judgment that you need to be an effective president.
Contrast that with the top Republican leader in Congress, who has used the indictment of Trump as an opportunity to take a shot at President Biden.
What about those pictures? Was that a good look for the former president to have boxes in a bathroom?
I don't know. Is it a good picture to have boxes in a garage that opens up all the time? A bathroom door locks.
We are joined now by Republican presidential candidate and former governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson.
And I will show that Asa Hutchinson clip, clip 9, if you're looking at the clip list down in the video description, as one of my 5 Republicans responding to the Trump indictment, sort of, to varying degrees. Do you see that Nikki Haley clip? You're going to see it again in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary I'm about to show you. And she has and it shows how she first said that it was serious and she was almost going to attack Trump for the conduct that's alleged in the indictment. Oh, and by the way, under sources in the video description, the first thing I put there is a copy of the entire federal indictment against Trump. It's a good read, 49 pages, but a lot of space. It only takes about 20 minutes to read, I would say, and you can get the whole story of what the special counsel Jack Smith is alleging that Trump did. Of course, Trump is presumed innocent, but the conduct alleged is incredibly serious, and if Jack Smith has the evidence to back up what is alleged in the indictment, as Bill Barr said last week, Trump is probably toast. But so he'll probably be convicted if the evidence is there. That's why I'm saying he's likely a criminal. A grand jury found it was more likely than not that he committed the crimes. That's why he was indicted. That's the standard for a grand jury, probable cause and all that. But Nikki Haley's saying that, even though she started off saying that it was serious and it was serious misconduct, then like the next day she's talking about a pardon because it wouldn't be good for the country to have a president in jail for years on a documents case. Of course, it's not just documents. It's like stealing nuclear secrets or stealing secret war plans and showing them to, in Bedminster, New Jersey. If you read the indictment under sources, you can see in the first few pages, it's alleged that he waved around the attack plan against the country of Iran to win some political battle he had left over with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. But anyway, I'm getting off my criticism of Nikki Haley, which I keep trying to say she's talking about a pardon because a president shouldn't be in jail for years on a documents case, but you don't need a pardon for that. You need a commutation. A pardon is when you actually get rid of the crime. Commutation just means you get rid of the punishment. So if she's worried about Trump being in jail, and I mean, that's kind of weird to have someone in jail who has Secret Service protection. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to some sort of commutation or some sort of deal where, I mean, I'm not really for jailing much of anybody. I think we are way over incarcerated as a society. And I mean, Trump, not as president, isn't that dangerous a person, I don't think. Well, I mean, then there's the E. Jean Carroll case, but that's a whole other thing. But anyway, I'm going to get to the next news summary, the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, covering a lot of the same territory, although Chuck Todd has this really weird formulation. It's kind of cute, but I don't think it really works. Republican candidates deciding will they, can they, should they go after Donald Trump. And I don't know the will they, can they, should they, trichotomy or whatever, or tripartite analysis. I think it's kind of stupid, but you can let me know what you think after we watch that news summary together over here.
Sunday morning and a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. As one former prosecutor put it pretty bluntly this week, 2 years from now, Donald Trump could be in prison or he could be president. With Trump holding a commanding lead over the Republican field this week, his opponents face the question that will dominate this race over the next 6 months. Will they, can they, and should they go after the former president over his federal indictment and Trump's legal issues that are likely to come? First, let's tackle the will they. Clearly, it would be the best way for any Republican candidate not named Trump to get some attention. But so far, the most direct criticism has come from single-digit candidates Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson. Hutchinson called on Trump to drop out of the race after the indictment, saying it's simply wrong to be discussing a pardon. And Christie said the conduct in the indictment is awful. But as Trump appeared in a Florida courtroom, even opponents who have criticized the charges as serious and as Donald Trump's behavior as reckless have diminished that very criticism of Trump with attacks against the Justice Department for bringing the charges against him in the first place. And before the case was even tried, they've been leaping to a promise of a pardon.
This is my commitment on January 20th, 2025, if I'm elected the next U.S. president, to pardon Donald J. Trump.
I think it would be terrible for the country to have a former president in prison for years because of a documents case. So I would be inclined in favor of a pardon. But I think it's really premature at this point when he's not even been convicted.
We're going to clean house at FBI Justice. We're going to do a lot. But part of it is using your Article 2 powers to redress wrongs, including potentially pardons. If there was a different standard, we're going to be very inclined to grant clemency in those situations.
Let's tackle part 2 of this question. Can they go after him on this? In a Quinnipiac poll this week, Trump leads the Republican field by 30 percentage points, garnering 53% of the vote, so over a majority. And in an NPR PBS Marist poll, while just 43% of Americans overall believe Trump should continue running for president given this indictment, A whopping 83% of Republicans believe he should keep running. Only 13% of Republicans believe Trump has even done anything illegal. Changing those voters' mind in a conservative media ecosystem that, at least for now, plans to defend Trump under any circumstances will be an uphill battle. The final part of this question, should they go after him? One candidate who has a pretty explicit take on the seriousness of protecting classified information, regardless of someone's money or position, was candidate Donald Trump in 2016.
In my administration, I'm going to enforce all laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law. We can't have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't understand the meaning of the word confidential or classified. One of the first things we must do is to enforce all classification rules and to enforce all laws relating to the handling of classified information.
Now, perhaps it applies to thee and not to me in that case. That was 2016, and his opponent was Hillary Clinton. Now, as one Republican strategist put it, if you aren't willing to criticize Trump, ask yourself why you're running to defeat him. Bottom line, the question for all of Trump's opponents is, what kind of party are they running to lead? On Friday, I sat down in Huntsville, Alabama, with Trump's one-time running mate, former Vice President Mike Pence.
Trump's wrong-time running mate? Well, just a slip of the tongue there, but I think that both those last news summaries were good. The last two, unless you think CBS News Face the Nation had it right by putting the China trip as the most important story. CNN State of the Union has a much shorter news summary, about a minute or so. Jake Tapper talking about the same thing, the Trump indictment dividing the Republican Party, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is thanking Dad. Happy Father's Day as we mark the beginning of summer and with it campaign season. President Biden kicked off his re-election effort with his first real rally on Saturday in Philadelphia, where he unveiled endorsements from labor unions critical to his coalition and offered a message that centered on the American economy. What you didn't hear? Any mention from Biden of the Trump indictment currently dividing the Republican Party. We're just 2 months from the first Republican presidential debate, and the legal crisis facing frontrunner Donald Trump is consuming the race in many ways, making it difficult for any of his competitors to get oxygen they need to gain support. And now, late this week, the Republican National Committee said it would refuse to give candidates a carve-out in the debate loyalty pledge the RNC is demanding. So in order to debate, candidates must pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee, even if that nominee becomes a convicted felon. It's a new wrinkle for a GOP field that has been largely hesitant to directly take on the man they're trying to be, with some exceptions, of course. And joining us now is one of those exceptions, Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie.
And I will have Chris Christie as my second Republican who is most critical of Trump after Bill Barr. Chris Christie will call Trump a petulant child, but you'll hear Bill Barr will call him a lot more than that. But I thought that was a pretty good news summary from CNN State of the Union. Short, sweet, to the point, and then even shorter, but not sweeter, I don't think, is the final news summary from Fox News Sunday. Shannon Bream making it seem like she's going to ask tough questions of Republicans about the Trump indictment, but later when we get to the final clip 11, she doesn't really ask tough questions of Senator Tim Scott at all. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the final news summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Dynamics in the Republican primary have never been more complicated. Former President Trump says he's raised millions of dollars in the last few days on the heels of, and possibly because of, an indictment over his alleged mishandling of classified documents. Now his 2024 primary rivals must balance the impossible. They want to carve out their own lanes as they challenge him, but they do not want to alienate his voters. This morning, you'll hear at length from two of them. Republican Senator Tim Scott, who says the charges are serious, but also says that he sees a double standard in the justice system. And Vivek Ramaswamy, who's pledging to pardon former President Trump. We begin with Republican Senator Tim Scott. Senator, welcome back.
and Shannon Bream does not really ask him about the seriousness of the charges at all. Like, actually asks him more from the other side. Like, you'll see when we get to the Tim Scott interview, she's asking, like, how do you restore the integrity of the Department of Justice? Like, already assuming that somehow the Department of Justice is biased against Republicans. The FBI, headed by Chris Wray, a Republican. You know, the FBI has never been headed by a Democrat. It's always headed by Republicans, including Chris Wray, who was appointed by Donald Trump, and yet somehow it's biased against Democrats. It's like full of cops. They're all cops. How many cops do you know that are liberals? Tell me that. Like, the FBI is liberal. That's one of the biggest jokes. But Shannon Bream, that's all she's going to ask Tim Scott. Like, how are you going to make the Department of Justice and the FBI less liberal, or basically? But that's the final clip I'll get to, clip 11. We've watched all the news summaries. Now I actually want to show you my favorite clip. This is like Bill Barr, who is not my favorite person and who I've criticized heavily when he was in the Trump when he was Attorney General for Trump, especially when he spun the Mueller report to make it seem like there was nothing there, when there were many instances of obstruction of justice that should have been prosecuted and would have been prosecuted if there wasn't this weird policy that a sitting president can't be prosecuted, that Bill Barr and Robert Mueller adhered to. But I mean, you can see the same obstruction of justice. That's just like Trump's modus operandi. That's the same thing he did you can read in the indictment that he was arraigned on in Miami on Tuesday, like down under sources. Read the indictment. There's all sorts of obstruction of justice, lying and hiding things and trying to intimidate people. That was in the Mueller report. And then there was all sorts of Russia collusion, just not chargeable criminal conspiracies. I talked about that at length last week. I'm not going to go off on that tangent again, but anyway, Bill Barr is not the most reliable source, but he says some things that he speaks some real truth, even more so than he did on Fox News Sunday last week, where he talked about how strong if even half of what's in the indictment is true, Trump is toast. And he talked about the strength of the charges. But now that he's been called a gutless pig by Trump, I guess he's like going for the personal attacks. And there's a lot of pretty strong personal attacks on Trump, about a consummate narcissist. We can't, our country can't be the therapy session for this broken man, I think, is by the time we get to the end. And anyway, it's definitely worth watching, and I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch Robert Costa's interview with Bill Barr, at least the first almost 6 minutes of it together over here.
Former President Trump now says everyone except Jews says this indictment is about election interference and should not have been brought. He said, the indictment is total BS. That's our shorthand for what he actually said. He's also known for watching the Sunday shows, and he obviously saw your appearance on another network last Sunday. Why is he wrong about this?
Well, this is not a circumstance where he's the victim or this is government overreach. He provoked this whole problem himself. Yes, he's been the victim of unfair witch hunts in the past, but that doesn't obviate the fact that he's also a fundamentally flawed person who engages in reckless conduct and that leads to calamitous situations like this, which are very destructive and hurt any political cause he's associated with. And this was a case that entirely of his own making. He had no right to those documents. The government tried for over a year quietly and with respect to get them back, which was essential that they do. And he jerked them around. And he had no legal basis for keeping them. But beyond that, when he faced his subpoena, he didn't raise any legal arguments. He engaged in a course of deceitful conduct, according to the the indictment that was a clear crime if those allegations are true, and was outrageous. What he did was, according to the indictment, is he took the documents out of storage, led his lawyer to believe that he'd be conducting a full search of the boxes, and then caused his lawyer to file with the court something saying that he had completed a search.
How strong is the special counsel's case on obstruction specifically?
Well, it's very strong because a lot of the evidence comes from his own lawyers. And furthermore, there's evidence of him saying things that are completely incompatible with any idea that this was an innocent document dispute.
Do you believe he lied to the Justice Department?
Do I personally believe it? Yes, I do.
And do you believe that he continues to claim that he has all these privileges and rights under the Presidential Records Act? Is he mischaracterizing the act?
Absolutely. The legal theory by which he gets to take battle plans and sensitive national security information as his personal papers is absurd. It's just as wacky as the legal doctrine they came up with for, having the vice president unilaterally determine who won the election. The whole purpose of the statute, the Presidential Records Act, was to stop presidents from taking official documents out of the White House. It was passed after Watergate. That's the whole purpose of it. And therefore, it restricted what a president can take. It says it's purely private, that had nothing to do with the deliberations of government policy. Obviously, these documents are not purely private. It's obvious. And they're not even now arguing that it's purely private. What they're saying is the president just has sweeping discretion to say they are, even though they squarely don't fall within the definition. It's an absurd argument.
Do you believe if he is convicted, he should serve his prison sentence?
Well, we haven't even gotten to the point of whether he's been convicted and also what his sentence should be. I don't like the idea of a former president serving time in prison.
Republicans remain critical of the Attorney General who spoke out this week, as well as Director Wray at the FBI. They've rallied to Trump's side. Are they wrong to say that this Justice Department is acting in a political way?
Well, if they're pointing to this case, I think they're wrong. I think the department had no choice but to seek those documents. Their basic argument really isn't to defend his conduct, because Trump's conduct is indefensible. What they're really saying is he should get a pass because Hillary Clinton got a pass 6 or 7 years ago. Now, I think, that's not a frivolous argument, but I'm not sure that's true. I think if you want to restore the rule of law and equal justice, you don't do it by further derogating from justice. You do it by applying the right standard here. And that's not unfair to Trump, because this is not a case where Trump is innocent and being unfairly hounded. He committed the crime. Or if he did commit the crime, it's not unfair to hold him to that standard.
You say Trump's alleged conduct is indefensible. So many Republicans continue to defend him. What will it say if the party, your longtime party, puts him forward as their nominee?
Well, that's the problem. I don't think they're actually defending his conduct, but they are saying it's unfair to prosecute him. But that then raises another question. Okay, if it's unfair to prosecute him, that's not the whole answer. The question is, should we be putting someone like this forward as the leader of the country, leader of the free world, who's engaged in this kind of conduct? The other thing is, this is not just an isolated example. Trump has many good qualities, and he accomplished some good things. But the fact of the matter is, he is a consummate narcissist, and he constantly engages in reckless conduct that puts his political followers at risk and the conservative and Republican agenda at risk.
Would he put the country at risk if he was in the White House again?
He will always put his own interests and gratifying his own ego ahead of everything else, including the country's interests. There's no question about it. This is a perfect example of that. He's like a defiant 9-year-old kid who's always pushing the glass toward the edge of the table, defying his parents to stop him from doing it. It's a means of self-assertion and exerting his dominance over other people. And he's a very petty individual who will always put his interests ahead of the country's, his personal gratification of his ego. But our country can't be a therapy session for, a troubled man like this.
Oh, therapy. Our country can't be a therapy session for a troubled man. I said broken man, but that's actually not that much worse than I think Bill Barr definitely took it up a notch from last week when he was on Fox News Sunday, where he was just talking about Trump's conduct alleged in the indictment and how he brought it on himself and he wasn't a victim. And this week he also talks about the Presidential Records Act, which is one of the most ridiculous defenses I've seen from the Trump team, where he's claiming that documents created by like the Department of Defense or the CIA or like all these agency documents are his personal paper. They're personal. They're not presidential records. But if you read the Presidential Records Act, it specifically says that documents created by executive agencies are not personal, and they are not documents that the president can decide to keep. It's right. Even if you read the case they're talking about from Judicial Watch versus the Clinton Library or whatever, where the sock drawer case or whatever, that said that some tapes, like Bill Clinton made recordings that he was going to use to write his personal memoirs, and these cassette recordings that he made of meetings or things he said himself, they ended up being personal because they weren't like classified documents created by some government agency, which is what Trump is claiming are his personal papers. It's just ridiculous, and Bill Barr points that out, and he really gets into Trump's personality. The 9-year-old child pushing the glass to the edge of the table, or the troubled man who, the consummate narcissist. It's Bill Barr really has Trump's psychological profile, I guess, from working for him, and he isn't afraid to trot it out for the national media after he's been called a gutless pig, I guess. Maybe that's why he reacted that way. Chris Christie, in the next clip, has sort of a similar criticism. He talks about the charges against Trump, and he doesn't call him a 9-year-old child, calls him a petulant child by the end of the newsmaker clip. Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union asking Chris Christie what he makes of Trump attacking all these people who used to work for him. And it's almost like this was a setup question, because Chris Christie has like all these notes ready to answer this question. I don't know. Let me know if you think, I don't think Jake Tapper really gave him the question in advance. Maybe it's just a coincidence he was so ready for this question, but you can tell me what you think after we watch the answer together over here.
So Trump on his social media site is attacking former Trump officials that who have criticized him over the indictment. He's saying his former chief of staff, retired Marine General Jon Kelly, has a very small brain. For some reason, he put brain in quotation marks. He also called Kelly a mummy who sat in his office and stared at the ceiling. Trump called his former Attorney General Bill Barr a gutless pig, lazy, and totally ineffective. What do you make of the comments?
Well, look, Jake, I stood on the stage in 2016 and heard Donald Trump say he would only hire the very, very best people and he would know how to manage them. But think about what happens here. Here's what he says about Rex Tillerson when he gets in. He says he's the embodiment of the American dream, former CEO of ExxonMobil. He said when he left, here's what he said about him. He's dumb as a rock and lazy as hell. About General Mattis, 4-star General Mad Dog Mattis, he said he was our very best general and that he was the closest thing we had to Patton. When he left, he said he was the most overrated general in American history. You mentioned Bill Barr and John Kelly already. How about Mick Mulvaney, who was his director of the Office of Management and Budget and his chief of staff? He said he was outstanding and brilliant. And when Mick Mulvaney left, he said he was a born loser. Lastly, how about General Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? He said he was a great American and a great patriot when he joined the administration. When General Milley disagreed with him and he left, he called him pathetic and a blanking loser. Now look, either Donald Trump, if you believe what he said when they left, that means he didn't pick the very best people and doesn't know how to pick personnel. If you believe what he said at the beginning, the great stuff, then this guy is the worst manager in the history of the American presidency. Either way, Republicans should listen to what he says. He's a petulant child when someone disagrees with him. And whether it's Bill Barr or John Kelly or General Mattis, whether it is Mick Mulvaney or whether it's, General Milley, if you disagree with Donald Trump, the petulant child comes out and he calls you names like the ones you just mentioned and the ones I mentioned.
So the RNC.
And then Jake Tapper follows up on this thing he reported in like his 1-minute news summary I showed earlier, that the Republican National Committee is making all the candidates take this pledge that they'll support the Republican nominee, even if the Republican nominee is a convicted felon, like Asa Hutchinson and some of the other candidates are asking for a carve-out where they don't have to support the Republican nominee if they're a convicted felon. But it's not like those pledges are enforceable anyway, which is something Chris Christie points out. And I mean, I kind of would like to see Chris Christie up on a stage with Donald Trump 8 years after the 2016 contest, where Chris Christie, I mean, he kind of took out Marco Rubio, but he didn't take out Trump. And no one was, Lindsey Graham said a bunch of nasty things about Trump. Ted Cruz said a bunch of nasty things about Trump, but none of it really stuck back in 2016. Maybe it will stick in 2024. And at the end of the interview, Chris Christie made this pitch, if you want me up on that stage against Donald Trump, just go to my website and donate $1, because, to get, he has to be at 1% or over 1% in a couple polls, and then he has to have 40,000 individual donors. So if you want Chris Christie on the stage, I guess it might be worth donating $1 to his campaign, although, I don't know, that's something I have to think through before actually doing it, because, I don't want to turn one of my dollars into immoral support of Chris Christie or whatever. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about whether we should support Chris Christie to be on this stage at the Republican debate, even if we don't really support Chris Christie. That's a good idea. But I'm showing the Republicans from harshest Trump critic to least harsh Trump critic. And the next one in line is Asa Hutchinson. At least he's willing to say that Trump is disqualified from being president based on his conduct so far. And, he's a former federal prosecutor. And so Jonathan Karl asks him to assess the federal indictment against Trump based on that experience. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes of that, and then talk with you a little more about the Republican reaction to Trump's indictment after we watch the clip together over here.
Governor Hutchinson, thank you for joining us. Before we get to the campaign, I want to ask you, from your perspective as a former federal prosecutor, how serious do you think these charges from Jack Smith are against President Trump, former President Trump, and how damning is the evidence that he's presented?
Well, I've tried scores of federal criminal trials and taken them to a jury, and the cases don't get any more serious than what's been outlined by Jack Smith, because you're talking about the allegations of not handling our nation's top secrets in accordance with law. You're talking about obstruction of justice, and these are serious, and obviously they're factually well-based because they lay out so many facts in the indictment. Now, obviously, you're going to hear another side whenever the defense presents their case, but this is serious, and obviously Donald Trump should take them seriously, but the American people should, because this case is most likely not going to come to trial before voters in Iowa and New Hampshire are going to have to decide the case. Or decide the vote, which is going to involve them evaluating the seriousness of these charges. And I view them serious and disqualifying, actually, for commander-in-chief.
Disqualifying. Well, I want to ask you about that, the timing. Based on your experience, do you think it is a real possibility that this trial could go forward, that Trump could be convicted and sentenced before the presidential election in November?
It could. Ordinarily, this kind of case would come in that order. I would estimate a year under the normal circumstances. But it all depends upon how much the judge is going to hold the counsel's feet to the fire and say this is important in the public interest, that this is handled in an appropriate way and not drug out. Now, ordinarily, you have the defense trying to drag it out, and there's going to be some real serious legal issues here. So I can see that this would be extended beyond the election date just because of the nature of this case. But I can also see that between June of next year and October, the election, that this case would be set for trial. Now, they might extend it because there is an election, but that really invokes the political time frame into the judge setting the calendar, and that should not be a consideration.
There have been some talk about pardons. You know, I've seen some of your other Republicans running saying that they would pardon Trump. But what I want to ask you about is the question of a self-pardon.
And that was actually a dumb question Jonathan Karl asked there. That's why I didn't keep it playing, like whether Trump has the ability to self-pardon, even though no court has ever ruled on that. That was the question. Then Asa Hutchinson answers, well, no court's ever ruled on that. So it's an open question, like the answer was in the question. But Asa Hutchinson is like the last of the five Republicans. He's number 3 of the 5 Republicans, and he's the last one who like is really critical of Trump. The next clip I'm going to show you was Mike Pence, who was like kind of trying to have it both ways, where he's like saying the charges against Trump are serious, but he never really answers any of Chuck Todd's questions. I think he starts off asking, like, if the allegations are true, should he be convicted? And like Mike Pence doesn't really answer that. He doesn't answer, he goes off into all these whataboutisms about Hillary Clinton and Hunter Biden, and the joke of a talking point that there's a 2-tiered justice system and old white rich Republicans are in the lower tier, because that's not our 2-tier justice system. And maybe I'll talk about that and how Chuck Todd doesn't really get any answers to his questions after we watch this longest, and this is like the worst cross-examination of the week. Chuck Todd just being led by the nose by Mike Pence through his whataboutisms and non-answers and deflections in the penultimate clip that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Do you think if these allegations are true, he deserves to be convicted?
Well, first, you know, moments like this, I think it's important for leaders in this country and those of us who aspire to leadership to return to first principles. The first principle is no one's above the law. The second principle is that every American is entitled to a presumption of innocence. Now, I've read the indictment in detail, and the allegations in the indictment are serious, and I can't defend what is alleged. But the former president deserves his day in court. He deserves the opportunity to make his defense in a court of law, and so I want to reserve judgment about this until he's had an opportunity to take his case into the courtroom and take his case to the American people. I will never diminish the importance of protecting our nation's secrets, particularly those that bear upon our national security. I have a son in the Marine Corps. I have a son-in-law in the United States Navy. We've got to ensure that classified materials, especially those that have been alleged in this indictment that bear upon our national security, are protected and secured. But that being said, we've gone through years, Chuck.
But during the 2016 campaign, you said what Hillary Clinton did with the server and the mishandling of classified documents in October of 2016, you said it disqualified her to be commander-in-chief. Does this disqualify Donald Trump to be commander-in-chief again?
Well, I stand by that view. It's one more example of a 2-tier justice system that we've been living through for 7 years. I mean, I have to tell you, after seeing Hillary Clinton given a pass
by your Justice Department, it was by a Republican. No. Wait, no. Jeff Sessions had another U.S. attorney look into everything with the Clinton Foundation and didn't bring charges. This is a Republican.
James Comey.
This was a Republican Justice Department.
In the run-up to the election, you know, Chuck.
I understand that, but you guys looked at it
again. I'm not correcting you on history. Hillary Clinton was given a pass, and then we went 2.5 years through a Russia investigation that we now know from the Durham report should have never been begun.
Actually, there was an Inspector General report that said there was no politics involved with this, that everything was a legitimate reason to investigate. Again, these are all Republican appointees that have done this.
Chuck, the independent counsel found that the investigation into Russian collusion should never have been initiated. And yet we lived through 2.5 years of a constant barrage on your network, on the cable network associated with you, and many of the other mainstream media suggesting that there was Russian collusion. We had public officials that said there was evidence of collusion. Never happened. And then I thought it was disgraceful the way big media and big tech essentially colluded to suppress the story of the Hunter Biden laptop in the run-up to the 2020 campaign, when the FBI actually had the laptop and knew it was legitimate. And so, look, it's hard for me to believe that politics didn't play some role in the unprecedented decision to bring an indictment against the former president of the United States. But I want to be clear.
I understand that you take it seriously.
No one's above the law, and the allegations are serious.
You believe there's all this politics that influenced this decision. What was the Justice Department supposed to do? Should they not have charged him because he's an active candidate for president? Even in the face of all of these serious allegations, should they not have brought charges?
Well, as I said in the run-up to this indictment, I had hoped that the Department of Justice would see its way clear to resolve this issue short of criminal charges.
Is that on the Justice Department or on the former president? I mean, he could have, he didn't respond to a subpoena. He didn't respond to requests. I mean, as Bill Barr said, he brought this on himself.
Chuck, I understand what's been reported in the news. We'll see what comes out in evidence in a court of law. But look, I want to say to you that I had hoped for several reasons that the Department of Justice would have done otherwise. Because it's, as we have seen in the last week, this has only served to further divide our divided politics. And I have to tell you, as someone that has represented the United States on the world stage, as someone who was on the International Relations Committee for 10 years, we're the gold standard of justice in the world. And to see a former president of the United States be subject to an indictment by the administration of the current president that he may well be facing again in the future, that sends a terrible message to the wider world, where there are many third world countries around the world where that pattern is very common.
Imagine deciding that you have evidence that a former president commits a crime and you don't charge. That could be just as damaging to our gold standard rule of law example, could it not?
I think the proper answer right now, because we have an indictment, and as I said, the allegations are serious, and the proper approach now is for equal treatment under the law. The Department of Justice, I would like to see bring equal vigor to the investigation into allegations around Hunter Biden. I mean, we have investigations swirling around Hunter Biden.
How do you know that they're not doing that right now?
Well, I want to see them come forward.
There's a U.S. attorney in Delaware that's been looking into this for quite some time.
That would reflect their commitment to equal treatment under the law. And frankly, the fact that that President Biden was found to have had classified documents dating all the way back, not just to his years as vice president, but to his years in the United States Senate, I would like to see the Department of Justice moving forward vigorously with that investigation.
He appointed a special counsel.
That's equal treatment under the law.
So you approve of what Garland did by having a special counsel look into the president?
Well, we'll see what happens, Chuck. I mean, the American people have seen, so far that the former president has been subject to an indictment.
There's a difference between equal treatment and equal outcome.
There is a perception,
Are you looking for an equal outcome or equal treatment? Chuck, you get my point?
I get your point, and I think I'm being very clear on this. I think the American people would like to see evidence that we don't have a two-tiered system of justice. 7 years, it appears as though Democrats get one level of treatment, and Republicans, especially those of us in the Trump Pence
keep bringing up
administration get
7 years.
another.
But,
And
Mr. Vice
the
President,
American
you keep
people
bringing up 7 years.
want to see action by the Department of Justice that proves to them or starts to prove to them that that's not the case.
Did the
Because I got to tell you,
Sessions bar Justice Department politicize things in favor of the Democrats?
And, you know, that, I guess it's almost like a reverse of Chuck Todd's usual problem, where usually he doesn't listen and follow up based on the answers. And this time he gets like too caught up in listening to what Mike Pence is saying and following up on what he said in his answer, and never really gets any answers to his original question, like or any of his questions. His original question was like, if the allegations are true in the federal indictment, should Trump be convicted? Did Mike Pence ever answer that question? I don't think he did. And he did a whole bunch of whataboutism about and the whole like two-tier justice system, which is a big joke where it's like Republicans, like rich white old Republican guys are the lower tier in our justice system. No, that's not true. Like, even if you're like Matt Taibbi is a darling of the right? He just did the Twitter files as one of the journalists that Elon Musk picked to do the Twitter files about the supposed right-wing bias on Twitter. Well, Matt Taibbi wrote this book called The Divide about our two-tier criminal justice system. And guess what? It's not old rich white guys who are in the bottom tier. Not at all. It's kind of the opposite. Or you can read The New Jim Crow. This book here by Michelle Alexander, if you want to know about our racist, classist criminal justice system. Or you can read A Colony in a Nation by Chris Hayes, also about the real two-tiered criminal justice system. I have great criticism for every anchor or interviewer who lets Republicans get away with that two-tier criminal justice system talking point without ever really talking about the real two tiers in our criminal justice system. But he, also Chuck Todd got distracted by the Hunter Biden, by the Hillary Clinton, by the end there, he at least had one good follow-up question, which was like, well, the last 7 years of the Justice Department, that's like the Jeff Sessions, Bill Barr Justice Department, because the Attorney General heads up the Justice Department. Christopher Wray, appointed by Trump, is the head of the FBI. The FBI, well, no one ever says, but is always headed by Republicans. There's never been a Democrat the head of the FBI. James Comey, also a Republican. J. Edgar Hoover, also a Republican. Like, the entire history of the FBI is Republican directors, and there aren't a lot of, the FBI is full of cops. Cops are not liberals. There aren't liberal cops. Did I say that in this live stream, or is that the one I had to like delete? I can't remember, but FBI does not have a liberal bias. It's a joke to claim that. And anyway, speaking of jokes, I'm going to show you the Fox News Sunday interview of Tim Scott here. You remember from the Fox News Sunday news summary, they made it seem like they were going to ask Republicans to react to the Trump indictment, but Tim Scott, who at some point said that the allegations against Trump are serious, never really gets asked about that by Shannon Bream. More, the questioning is about like how he's going to restore integrity to the Department of Justice with the assumption that it's like biased against Republicans, which, as I was just explaining, is a joke. And I'll talk about that joke a little more after we watch this final just 90-second clip. This is the only question Shannon Bream asked Senator Tim Scott about the Trump indictment, and never really gets into the substance or makes Tim Scott say anything negative about Trump at all, except like, you're confirming that you said they were serious, right? But other than that, nothing. That I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that final clip together over here.
You have said that you think the DOJ indictment of President Trump is a serious issue. Do you believe it's politically motivated? You've said you would restore integrity at the DOJ. What would you do?
The first thing we have to do is fire Joe Biden. The second thing we do is fire Merrick Garland. And the third thing we do is fire Chris Wray. We have to clean out the political appointments in the Department of Justice to restore confidence and integrity in the DOJ. Today, we want to know that in our justice system, Lady Justice wears a blindfold, and that all Americans will be treated fairly by Lady Justice. But today, this DOJ continues to hunt Republicans while they protect Democrats. And it's not just a former president. Think about the fact that a pro-life activist, his home was invaded by a SWAT team, guns pulled. Think about parents who show up at school board meetings. By this DOJ, they're called domestic terrorists. And then weaponizing the DOJ against your political opponents, I can't think of anything more un-American and more unacceptable.
Okay. Do you think that the indictment is political in nature? Just want to make sure we get you on that. And will you sign on to a pledge that our next guest is asking all GOP candidates to sign on to, that you would pardon President Trump if convicted and you became president?
I'm not going to deal with the hypotheticals, but I will say that every American is innocent until proven guilty.
Okay, Senator Scott, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
That was not a very good follow-up there. I'll just say every American is innocent until proven guilty. That doesn't really follow up at all, and doesn't make Senator Tim Scott say anything negative about Trump based on the allegations in the indictment. Like I said, that whole interview was kind of a joke. That is the last of my news clips. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out these clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary, especially today where I had to restart the program after there was some glitch in my internet service or streaming, or I don't know what the problem was, but it's all fixed now, and I finished the live stream, and I appreciate all of you who stuck with me through the live program, the 25 or 30 of you who showed up for the live program, and hopefully this will be available as a recorded live stream in about 12 hours. It used to be like an hour or so and the live stream would be available, and now YouTube takes like 12 hours to process it. I don't know why that is, but anyway, if you want to support what I'm doing, I'm going to keep doing it for you every Monday all the way through January 2025, and when we find out who not only won the 2024 election, but who actually takes power after we go through the whole January 6th situation again in 2025. I don't know. We'll see how that turns out. And that's why I'm going to stick with you every Monday through January 2025 to give you my Monday Media Mix-Up. And if you want to support that financially, right under the video, there are links to become one of my monthly patrons on Patreon, or to give me a one-time PayPal contribution. That's one of the things that really increases my morale and my motivation to keep doing this, although I made a promise I'm going to do it. Even if all my financial support disappears, honestly, I'm going to keep doing it through January 2025. But think how much better I'll feel about it if you chip in and help me out to help remunerate me for my 10, well, today it's more like 12 hours of work that I put into this live stream. And anyway, I will be back next Monday and every Monday through January 2025 doing this for you. And until I have some reason to upload some other video, or until next Monday, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.